We're back on Yaffee Live, Talk Radio 102.3, a revolution in common sense. That's what we do here on the Talk Monster. Appreciate you joining the show. Interesting story here. It says authorities arrest Tren de Aragua sex traffickers and others in Tennessee. So we got to talk about that and more right now with Brandon Lewis, who is the founder of the Tennessee Conservative. You can read those stories and more at TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Brandon, how are you, sir?
Outstanding, Yaffee. What a beautiful spring day in the scenic city.
It is gorgeous out there. I should have broadcasted outside. I mean, Max and I should have just taken this stuff.
There's no Max outside. You go outside. I have to stay in here.
Oh, that's true. That's true. The producer would have to stay.
Forgot that, didn't you?
So, Brandon, you had this story on your site about arrest Tren de Aragua sex traffickers. I'm a little confused because there were some who were saying that the gang members aren't even here. They're not here. It's no big deal.
We don't have any gang members, Yaffee, and we don't have any illegal aliens in the schools. They're not, no, they're not committing crimes all over the place. It's just that is all right-wing fear-mongering. And so basically 8 Venezuelan nationals and a confirmed TDA member, which is, Tren de Aragua, which I can't pronounce very well, were indicted for allegedly operating an illegal commercial sex and sex trafficking enterprise outside of Nashville for about 2 years. We've had Mexican nationals also recently arrested for distributing cocaine, trafficking, multiple kilograms between California and Tennessee. 12 men were also sentenced. This is a separate case to a combined 70 years for drug trafficking, fentanyl, and other things in Tennessee. And we've had recent arrests of a Honduran national who was in the country illegally. He was arrested in Memphis on assault charges, also arrested before previously. And, we've got a Mexican national charged with possession of ammunition and unlawful entry after shooting a dude multiple times in Antioch. And then finally, this just so you make sure you got a baker's dozen here, another case, a convicted sex offender was arrested in Gibson County after previously being convicted of sexual battery in Oklahoma. So, it is great that we're catching people and that we're arresting folks, but boy, it sure would be nice if they didn't want to come here in the first place.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in just a moment because we have some stories on that. But, man, this really does show that the border crisis was not just a crisis at the border, right? It really shows how every state was a border state, that when you were just letting in millions of people, it wasn't going to just affect Texas. It's affecting Tennessee. It's affecting other states.
Well, of course. I mean, it's not just crime. It's education. It's the medical field. It's insurance rates. It's the job market. It's everything. I mean, it puts a strain on every system when you allow millions and millions of people to come into your country without any kind of check or balance or background review. And so we're just living with the consequences and probably will be for years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. You had another story here talking about how in 3 months, nearly 3,000 illegal border crossers were arrested by Tennessee officers. In addition to federal agents arresting and prosecuting illegal border crossers for a range of crimes, including sex and drug trafficking, we were just talking about, local law enforcement officers in Tennessee arrested thousands for a range of crimes, including for violent assault charges. And in just 3 months, nearly 3,000 illegal border crossers were arrested. That's according to the Tennessee District Attorney's General Conference report. So, wow.
Well, and I think, what is that? Is that not just like... I can't remember because it's not in front of me. It's not like that's like a 6-month period or something, or maybe even a 4-month period. It's just since they've started reporting, and it's just the sheriff's offices that are 3 months. Okay,
yeah.
So it's just something that's important to know if I remember my facts correctly. Not every sheriff is actually reporting this like they should. I think that came out in the interview I did with Austin Garrett, and to my knowledge, the Metro Police Departments are not even required to do it. So that means, whatever you see in Hamilton County, it's probably 3 or 4 times as bad in Chattanooga City. And so, and I would say that's the same for all the big metro areas that, if the city were to dump its data in there, and if the counties were to actually properly do this, that number probably wouldn't be 3,000. It'd probably be like 9,000.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I didn't even think about that. Now, I want to remind people as well, if they want to see that interview you had with Sheriff Garrett, you can find that at your website, TennesseeConservativeNews.com. I know you've been interviewing a bunch of lawmakers as well. And this next story we got to talk about, just, not good news, unfortunately, but apparently there have been some RINOs that have killed the Trump Act in subcommittee. I mean, this was the one by Gina Bolso, really handles illegal immigration well if it could pass, and was killed in committee.
Yes, so this bill did three fundamental things for the audience. Number one is it defined an illegal alien as not being a Tennessee resident. Just because you're residing here, if you're in the country illegally, we don't owe you welfare. We don't owe you education benefits. We don't owe you any other benefit that is bestowed naturally upon a Tennessee resident. For years, and even now, Tennessee Republicans have been perfectly fine with defining illegal aliens as Tennessee residents, and it's horrible. And it also stopped the wiring of money from illegal aliens back to their country of origin, because it takes not only are they taking the jobs, they're not even spending their money here in Tennessee. And so Gina was like, hey, here are three things we could do that would be very preventative. And it was killed by Republicans. And we had another bill that was killed this same way. And what happened was Susan Lynn and Tandy Darby had the courage to vote for the bill. But then Pat Marsh is a Republican out of Shelbyville in District 62. He voted along with Caleb Hemmer as the lone Democrat. And the other thing that bothers me is Michael Hale, Kelly Kessling, and Kevin Vaughn didn't even show up to the committee to vote.
No.
Didn't even show up, and that's 42% of the committee, right? There's only 7 people on the committee. And so when you see what happens is these bills come in that constituents are begging for. It's like the number one, number two issue. And then instead of them voting against the bill and having it on the record, they inexplicably find a reason to be absent from the meeting.
Wow.
This also happened with Todd Warner's Sanctuary City transport bill, the exact same thing. And John Crawford voted with the one Democrat, and then Dennis Powers was there, present but not voting, and then every other committee member left, right? And Greg Martin spoke against the bill, and then left to go present a bill in another committee without voting in the committee, probably because he was going to vote no. And he didn't want it on his record. And the thing that kills me is making a decision. This is something people are begging for. The bill that Martin presented was like some minuscule traffic thing about not blocking a roadway if you're soliciting or something. And I'm like, that is great, and I'm sure it's a good bill. Maybe it'll be helpful in some situations, but if you surveyed primary voters in Tennessee, that would be like issue 517 in an order of importance. Illegal immigration goes back and forth between 1 and 2. So for the sake of your constituents, what Mr. Martin should have done is to simply have stayed in that committee and voted affirmatively on this so we could have passed it out. And so we've seen this same tactic. I mean, I guess finally, for the first time ever, there's a conservative news outlet that reports on how these Republicans are voting, and they don't want it on the record, and so they just don't show up to their committee meetings.
So outside, because you're right, those not showing up, I guess they probably haven't given a good reason why. But have the Republicans that voted no? I mean, have they given a reason? I mean, what's their biggest complaint about this?
Well, the biggest reason in probably the situation with the Trump Act was the wiring, which I was worried about that being in there. I almost wish it hadn't been in there because the banks and the Western Unions and all the money lenders, it's funny, the money lenders were the ones that Jesus drove out of the temple. And so the money lenders show up to Nashville and they start handing out PAC checks, and they do that for about a decade. And then whenever something comes up that's good for the citizenry, but maybe not the best for the banks are like money. And then people that have taken that money for decades, like Pat Marsh, and probably Michael Hale and Kelly Kessling and Kevin Vaughn are like, it just might cost me a few $1,000s a year from PAC checks. I feel like I owe these people a favor. And so there's a combination of that stuff. But honestly, for all the tough talk on the campaign out there, there's not really any action. The only thing we have left is Bo Watson and William Lamberth's bill to allow LEAs, which we're about to talk about, to refuse citizen or refuse illegal aliens or making them pay tuition. And even that, Yaffee, got watered down. He had to change the bill to where it allowed but didn't mandate LEAs to conduct a citizenry background check. The bill used to be like you have to do the citizen background check, but then you can decide if you're going to keep them or not. And this one bill that's left that's somewhat preventative, but is honestly passing the buck to school board members, has made it out of committee. But, the longer it gets negotiated by these RINOs, the less effective it is.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing because, you're talking about HB 0793. You're right, sponsored by Representative William Lamberth. Passed the House Education Committee 11-7 on Wednesday, which is good. And apparently, I guess there were some protests and everything else because that's all the Democrats. I mean, you're talking about the Democrats. It's just all they do in Tennessee, apparently. But you're right. The problem with that is it gives the school districts the option, right? So there still could be a school district that just, I guess a lot of them could still choose to take in illegal immigrants. Yeah,
and so it's going to be incumbent upon citizens in Hamilton County, if this thing finally limps its way, weakened as it probably will be, out of the committee structure on both sides, and if Bill Lee will even sign the thing into law. I mean, there's a good chance he may veto it. Like, he has done absolutely nothing but make illegal immigration worse since he's been in office. And so, it's got to get out from behind the budget, which is another huge hurdle. And hopefully Bo Watson, if Bo Watson is your senator, you need to email that man and thank him for carrying this, because this is the first major preventative piece of legislation that's been carried by leadership. Gino Bolso's not in leadership. And a similar bill was killed by Farrell Hale, Adam Lowe, Mark Pody, which surprises me, and Bill Powers. And it just cut off the funding at the state level. Like, it wasn't a negotiable thing. It's like, if you're here illegally, we're going to check your citizenship status, and then we're just not going to enroll you unless you want to pay tuition. And that was also killed by Charlie Baum, Tim Hicks, and Mark White as well. The previous bill, HB 0793, Mark White, Charlie Baum, Tim Hicks, and Mark White are notoriously bad RINOs. They show up every session. They find 5 or 6 things that are core conservative issues, and they murder them. They do far more. These RINOs do far more harm to the Republican GOP primary voter than the Democrats ever have, as long as I've been covering this.
So in terms of the previous bill that wouldn't have given the school boards the option, you had mentioned that a bunch of Republicans killed it, including some that, we thought were pretty conservative. Did they give a reason why? Was it just they thought it was bad to not give the school boards the option?
Well, there's two things. There's two things going on. Number one is the bleeding heart humanitarian argument, which seems to like cloud everybody's judgment on every single solitary thing. It's the same kind of faulty, failed logic that turned San Francisco into a sea of drug-induced, homeless, nasty zombies from one of the most beautiful, breathtaking cities in the world. It's that same, we need to help, we need to help, we need to help. And yes, you help and help and help, but then the native population ends up fleeing, and that's the same thing that has happened in our schools, many of which are in Hamilton County, where they have been so inundated by illegal aliens that the native black and white students have been pushed out of the school system and have had to go other places, or are now, in a school where the Spanish is spoken more than English. And so it's just, it's terrible. And hats off to Bo Watson for being strong on this and carrying it through. I hope he can see it through, but it's been disappointing. It's been disappointing for 4.5 years, Yaffee, because this is like a episode of Groundhog Day for me.
Yeah.
I've seen these bills brought and killed repeatedly, and I keep thinking, okay, Trump's in office. Maybe they'll feel some pressure. Maybe they're worried about the 2026 primaries. But apparently the answer is no, they're not. And they don't care. and they're not going to do anything. And so I think the only option we have left in 2026 is just to replace these people.
Now, Bo Watson's the majority leader. Am I right?
No,
In the
well,
Senate?
William Lamberth is the majority leader. I don't remember exactly what Bo's. I think it's maybe like Speaker Pro Tem. I'm not sure, but then
There's something. I've had him on the show before. It's been a little bit. But,
yes, his main role, and you should call him and interview him, because the Times Free Press and all the liberal broadsheets have just been raking him over the coals like it's just.
Oh, that means he's doing something right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the worst thing ever to save $700 million a year for Tennessee taxpayers. It's the worst thing in the world to focus on Tennessee kids first, and to make the school environment better with strained resources that we have. It's disgusting. But that, when your entire newsroom is corporately funded Democrats, I mean, that's just what you're going to get. I mean, you saw the article recently they wrote, as if there was some sort of devious thing going on, that Austin Garrett spent 5 weeks and $5,000, which in the grand scheme of things ain't much, traveling, and a lot of it had to do with his FBI task force stuff around rounding up illegals and being a partner with ICE. And I'm like, if our sheriff wants to spend some time and money proactively without being nagged by the electorate, what we want to happen, I mean, that is fantastic. And so I don't care if he's spending the money on that. I can't think of anything better to spend the money on.
Brandon Lewis, really appreciate you coming on the show. People can read these stories and more. Like you said, you're always keeping up with the latest. They can read it at TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Brandon, appreciate it. Keep up the good fight. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Hopefully we'll have some good news the next time I come on, some things that will actually make it through. So I can't promise you anything, but I'm still hopeful.
All right. There you go.